After just 2 years in the Senate, Vance is the first millennial to be put on a major presidential ticket. He's also the first veteran of the Iraq War. The 39-year-old from Ohio has a major connection to Canada. While enrolled at Yale Law School, Vance met Jamil Jivani. The Conservative MP was elected to Parliament in a by-election earlier this year. They are, in Jivani's words, best friends. And when Vance married his wife Usha in an interfaith wedding back in 2014, Jivani was there to perform a Bible reading. When it comes to Vance's political views, his previous distaste of Trump is well documented.
Unfortunately, I think that Trump is distracting us from the real issues. I don't think that he has good plans to bring jobs back.
Following Trump's election win, Vance's tune changed. And during the 2022 midterms, he was rewarded with the former president's endorsement.
This man is going to win. Come on up, JD.
Fast forward to the present, where Vance is now a key figure promoting the Republican Party's America First attitude. Where does Canada fit into Vance's views?
How much do we want to ensure that our critical supply chains are either controlled by America or controlled by actual allies like Canada or the United Kingdom, as opposed to, the Chinese?
That interview with Jivani is from 2020, but in an op-ed shared a year later, Vance called out America's trade pact with Canada and Mexico for making the U.S. less self-sufficient economically. Now, people on this side of the border will wait to see if a Trump-Vance ticket turns its attention back to Canada. Well, for more on J.D. Vance, his rise and future in the Republican Party, we've reached David Graham tonight. David is a staff writer at The Atlantic, and he joins us from Durham, North Carolina. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
What does J.D. Vance bring to this Republican ticket?
He brings a few things. One is a sort of intellectual heft. Another one is a real working class credential, which Trump doesn't have. But I think most of all, what he does is he brings somebody who is willing to defend Trump really aggressively and is committed to the vision that Trump laid out in his first term and has proposed for his second term as well.
There's not diversity on this ticket. Tim Scott or Marco Rubio would add that. Do you think that will be a factor?
Well, I think what this shows is Trump feels really confident about his electoral prospects. He didn't feel like he needed to do something that might, appeal to some other demographic or different voters. He thinks that the sort of hard MAGA approach is something that is going to appeal to voters. So I think that's what we can read into the pick. Whether it will make a difference, I don't know. If his theory of the race is right, it won't. And I think he's shown that he can sometimes appeal to different demographics simply by the policies he's proposed rather than sort of demographic picks per se.
Vance is only 39 years old, much younger than some of the competitors that he was facing for VP pick. It's a rapid rise for him. What message is the Republican Party trying to send with Vance, and particularly somebody young?
Vance is really a remarkable figure. He has only been in the Senate now for about 2 years, not even 2 years. And 8 years ago, he was somebody with a best-selling book who was fresh on the scene and a big Trump critic. So it's been a very fast rise. He brings a few things that Trump doesn't. I think he is one of several people who are working to kind of create an intellectual underpinning for Trumpism. Many of Trump's impulses seem just that. They're impulses. They're positions he's held, but he won't talk about them in a lot of depth. And you see Vance trying to fill that out, talking about an intellectual case for pronatalism policies and for tariffs and for anti-migration policies. So he's kind of trying to fill that out. And I think that creates the possibility of what Trumpism might look like once Donald Trump is no longer a presidential candidate or the leader of the Republican Party.
Some believe that J.D. Vance and his credentials bring a little bit more polish to this ticket. Back in 2017, Vance even likened himself to Barack Obama in a New York Times opinion piece. Well, what do you make of that?
I think that's true. He does two things in that way. One, he brings a sort of intellectual heft that Trump doesn't have. But he also brings a real working class credential, having raised as a member of the working class in fairly dire circumstances. And that's something that Trump can't do. Trump is a New Yorker born and bred and was born into money. So I think the hope among Republicans is that Vance can kind of speak to both elites and intellectuals and also to that working class demographic. Whether he's actually able to do that, I think, we'll see.
We'll wait and see, for sure. Do you think that the criticism that he had previously of Trump is going to make a difference at all, or is that in the past?
You know, it's interesting that Trump was able to get past it, and he's somebody who does hold a grudge, but also somebody who's really excited when someone changes their mind about him and is willing to praise him. And Vance has really been willing to do that really aggressively, sometimes in fairly crude and blunt terms, I think. We see Democrats talking a lot about the things that Vance has said. You know, he wrote in the pages of The Atlantic that Trump was like cultural heroin in 2016. In a Facebook post, he wondered whether he was America's Hitler. And so you're definitely going to see people bring those out and saying, one, Vance was right before, and two, you can't really trust this guy if he's changed his opinion this much in such a short period of time.
You know, a common criticism of Vance's book, his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, is that he paints too broad of a brush when speaking about working class Americans from Appalachia, and that really plays into some stereotypes. How do you think he goes about trying to win over people who have that opinion?
You know, he's really taken up the kind of language of grievance that Trump has used for a long time in the last few years. In that book, he says, you know, if you are poor and you're not working, that's on you. You need to take personal responsibility. You shouldn't be blaming the government. You know, the government policies matter, but you need to sort of pick yourself up. And now we hear him saying is, yeah, it's the government's fault. You know, they're doing things to attack you. They're doing things to undermine you. And this is the language that Trump has used. So he's been very fluid, I think, in adopting that language and making it his own.
Okay. David, appreciate your time tonight. That is David Graham, a staff writer at The Atlantic. We reached him tonight in Durham, North Carolina. And I want to continue the conversation now with Nima Avashia. She is the author of Another Appalachia. The Guardian published her opinion piece this week. I'm from Appalachia. J.D. Vance doesn't represent us. He only represents himself. Thank you for being here.
Travis.
Nima, you do not hold back in your opinion piece. You write this, and I want to put a quote up on the screen for folks to see. A person who truly represented Appalachian people wouldn't take money from the same big pharma lobby that left West Virginia with the highest opioid overdose rate in the country. They wouldn't deny climate change in the face of catastrophic flooding that eastern Kentucky still hasn't recovered from 2 years out. They wouldn't stoke fear of immigrants who provide essential labor in Appalachia in healthcare, agriculture, and service industries. Why did you feel the need to write this piece?
I think because, precisely because of what your previous commenter was speaking about, which is that Vance is being cast as a spokesperson for the white working class and as someone who's an expert on Appalachia, and yet his views on Appalachia don't line up with the reality of the region in a lot of ways. He paints an Appalachia that is completely homogenous, whereas Appalachia is actually 20% at this point, people of color. And he locates responsibility for the struggles of Appalachia pretty squarely with the people of the place. Particularly in his book, he really uses this culture of poverty analysis to say that the struggles of the people of Appalachia are theirs because of who they are, that there's something fundamentally flawed or broken about them, and that if they're struggling, it's their responsibility. And he proceeds to, as a candidate, take money from the same industries that have actually ravaged central Appalachia in a lot of ways. I'm from West Virginia, and southern West Virginia was flooded with pills by Big Pharma. And there is plenty of documentation for the fact that they very intentionally poured pills into communities, misled doctors and patients as to the addictiveness of these pills. I don't understand how someone can be viewed as a spokesperson for the white working class in Appalachia if they're not being honest about the impact that industries like Big Pharma have had on our region. And I think that I find this very concerning as someone who's one step away from the presidency. The very limited information that we have about him, he's only been governing for less than 2 years. We don't have a ton of policy to go on. What we do have are his beliefs, which are pretty clearly articulated, although they seem to change all the time. And his beliefs about Appalachia alarm me. Because the people who are from Appalachia, who are from where I'm from, there is a lot of struggle. There's also a lot of strength that he never talks about, but there is a lot of struggle, and the analysis that he applies does not point towards better conditions for people in Appalachia. It points to a continued neglect and abandonment by both industry and government that I feel really worried about.
His book was a New York Times bestseller. It was later turned into a Netflix film. Why do you think his story spoke to so many people?
I think that people outside of Appalachia want to believe negative things about Appalachia. I think that is actually very well documented over the course of time. If you think about mainstream media representations of Appalachia, they are often very similar to the ideas that Vance is putting out there. Poor, white, working class, uneducated. Often the description is lazy is the word that's used. And those narratives allow a lot of people to absolve themselves of responsibility for what's happening in Appalachia, despite the fact that for many of us across the country, the natural gas that is heating our homes is fracked on the Marcellus Shale in Appalachia. For a long time, the coal that powered our electricity plant was coming out of Appalachia. So people across the country have been able to sort of extract resources from Appalachia without thinking about the impacts for people in the region. They've been able to dehumanize Appalachian people. And I think that a narrative of dehumanization or a narrative that says these people are struggling because of who they are, not because of anything you did, absolves a lot of people of responsibility. It lets them stay really comfortable and not have to think about the relationship between places like New England and California and the mountains of Appalachia.
Nima, appreciate your time tonight. That is Nima Chavia. She is the author of Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place.